Ryerson.
The next clue in the great ship's demise is being pulled from the ocean bottom. Today, a piece of titanic steel is raised to the surface. As the historic relic rises over the nadir, a sense of awe and reverence is felt among the crew. Titanic steel has its own story to tell after nearly a century of burial at sea. The night of the disaster, many survivors claim they heard incredible noises, awful and frightening sounds.
In the case of Titanic, you're talking about thousands of square feet of plate that are being mutilated and torn and giving off a tremendous amount of noise.
Is it possible that the noises heard that night were Titanic steel plates shattering like glass? To answer this question, a key piece of evidence is headed for America. To reconstruct what may have happened, Titanic steel has come here to be dissected and analyzed. Under the guidance of metallurgist Professor H.P. Laley, a team will test to see if Titanic steel is especially brittle. A small sample is cut and loaded into a scanning electron microscope. Metallurgists Chris Ramsey and Scott Miller peer deep into the steel's microstructure.
Pearlite, lots of inclusions. Let's focus it real fast. And then go back down in magnification, see what we have.
They are looking for potential weaknesses and defects in the steel.
Higher magnification shot.
Lots of ferrite and pearlite, big inclusion. That's a big one, probably a big old manganese sulfide. That's a big one. Big manganese sulfide.
As they suspected, the steel is full of large manganese sulfide inclusions, chemical imperfections that create weak areas which cause the steel to be brittle. Such was usually the case for steel produced in the early 20th century.
Steels in that turn of the century were made in very small lots, maybe 70 tons, whereas today we make them in 400-ton batches. Quality control was a problem in those days.
Certainly compared to today's steels, this is inferior. But for the steels at the time, it was probably about as good as they could do. We've got pearlite, You wouldn't want to build a ship out of this stuff today.
At the time the Titanic was built, no one suspected that these chemical impurities could make steel fragile under extreme conditions. Investigators suspect that the extreme cold water temperatures of the North Atlantic caused the steel to become even more brittle.
The waters of April 14 to 15, 1912 are unusually cold for the Atlantic at that time of year. 28 degrees seawater is not the ordinary seawater you find in April.
H.P. Lely chills a bar of Titanic steel to the water temperature the night of the disaster. The sample will be subjected to a violent impact. The fractured piece of Titanic is sent to another lab to be examined by mineral scientist Timothy Fakey.
I find it quite exciting to be able to work on steel from the Titanic, to be able to look at the mystery of what all went together to contribute to the sinking.
Fakey's tests confirm that Titanic steel, with its weak manganese sulfide areas, became more brittle when subjected to the cold temperatures.
The fracture surface shows 95% of the grains in the sample cracked.
The lines of the fracture trace back to the weak spots in almost every case.
So you see the effect of manganese sulfide particles on the fracture behavior of this steel. More or less, when you take the steel down to a lower temperature, you're actually shattering something that's just full of holes.
The night of the disaster, as Titanic begins to break, it's likely that much of the ship's steel suffered brittle fracture. This new evidence supports what some survivors heard. Nobody knows for sure what happened to Titanic once she dipped beneath the waves and headed for the ocean floor. Researchers want to know how the bow escaped relatively unscathed. The stern, on the other hand, is completely destroyed. Decks are curled back. The hull is in shambles. What happened to the stern on her way down to the bottom?
We don't have a real fine understanding of what happened as the ship sank from the water surface down to the seabed because of the myriad of forces that are involved here.
It's a fantastic contrast because the forward end actually looks like a ship.
David Livingstone and Bill Garsky are trying to reconstruct what happened to the bow and the stern once they slipped beneath the surface.
It still looks very much like a ship. The railings are there, fantastic shadows.
They believe that as the bow dropped, it was already filled with water, so it was not crushed by the increasing water pressure.
The bow actually is in good condition compared to the stern because of the equalization of pressure during the sinking process of the surface.